The night had fallen without sound, like a great hand covering the land in velvet shadow. I had seen it happen countless times, the way stars appeared timidly at first, then bravely whole constellations flung across the sky. But that night was different. There was something beneath the silence, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. I, the field, the quiet slope outside Bethlehem, had grown old watching men pass with sheep, children chasing after stray lambs, women praying beneath the olive tree, old men singing songs they barely remembered. Generations had come and gone, their footsteps soft against my grass, their sorrows whispered into the wind. And yet, on that night, none of them were there. No lanterns flickered, no laughter, only me, and the dark, and the stars too quiet to speak. In that stillness, I remembered. I remembered the voices from long ago prophets whose words had echoed into the soil. They had spoken of a child, a ruler, someone who would come from this land but belonged to no man. I had listened, as the stones did, as the trees did, but over time even hope became a weight too heavy to carry. Still, the words had not left me. They had nestled beneath the roots, curled beneath the frost, waiting. There is something sacred in waiting, something holy in not knowing when. I had watched shepherds grow old with their flocks, watched them bury their own sons, watched them curse the sky and then pray to it again. Some nights, when the wind was kind, I would catch their hymn-soft melodies of longing, of a people who once believed they were chosen. And now, as the stars pulsed above me, that same longing rose from the stones. It came not from mouths, but from marrow. Creation groaned, but softly, reverently, as though afraid to wake what was already stirring. I did not know his name, not yet, but I could feel him. Not in the wind, not in the scent of crushed thyme or the hum of distant owls. I felt him in the way the air pressed against me, in the way the ground below my roots seemed to warm ever so slightly, as if a fire had been lit in the belly of the world. I had lived through wars, through droughts, through exiles and returns. I had heard the names of kings shouted, cursed, forgotten. But tonight, no king's name was spoken, no one claimed glory. And yet, something more powerful than an army was approaching. He would not come on chariots. There would be no trumpet. The sky would not split in thunder. No, he would come in stillness. That was the part no prophet had dared to say, that God would come without noise, that he would come through softness, through a baby's breath, through straw and sweat, through fear and faith. I wondered, then, if the world was ready, if any heart was still tender enough to recognize divinity hidden in helplessness. I thought of those who had passed over Miman, with hardened faces and cracked hands, who sang lullabies to lambs but could not quiet their own despair. Would they believe it if they saw it? Would I? Or had even I become too used to silence to recognize the voice when it finally spoke? There was a rustle on the hill above me, a shift of shadow and movement. Shepherds, their shapes familiar, but their steps strange-light, expectant. One of them dropped his staff. Another pointed to the sky, his mouth open. I followed his gaze, and there, among the thousand ordinary stars, one burned brighter than the rest, as if it had been waiting too, held back by centuries, now loosed like a secret finally told. The air pulsed, not with heat, but with meaning. The wind bent the tips of my grass, and I, the field, bowed with it. For the first time in all my years, I felt not just trampled, but chosen. I had waited, and I would wait again. But tonight, something holy brushed across me, and I whispered, though no one could hear, "Welcome, we've been waiting so long." The hush that lingered over me felt not like emptiness, but like anticipation suspended in the stars. It was as if creation itself remembered a promise it had not spoken of for centuries, a vow whispered in the wind and buried in dust, now stirring gently within the soil of my body. I thought of the prophets whose feet once brushed my grass, who cried in the wilderness of time for a hope unseen. They had long since returned to the earth, their bones part of me now. Yet their voices lived on. I heard them in the rustling leaves, in the flicker of shadow, in the aching stillness before dawn. I had no voice, no hands to raise, no lips to sing, but I knew how to remember. Still, I had learned patience, not out of virtue but necessity. I had listened to prayers rise and fall, promises broken, wars waged, empires come and gone like the passing of herds. The Roman boots that pressed me now were no heavier than those of Assyrians or Babylonians before them. But tonight, those boots were absent. Tonight, it was not an empire that ruled, but a silence thick with glory. The kind of silence that trembles just before a child cries out for the first time. I felt the weight of invisible feet pacing above me, the soft rush of garments stirred by wonder. The shepherdsmen whose names history would never remember had left their fires, their flocks, their fear. Something had called them, something greater than command. A message had found them in the most ordinary of places, not in scrolls or palaces, but in fields like me. And because they believed, they moved. That, perhaps, is the greatest miracle, that belief still moved men. They would not return the same. I knew this. I, who had carried the echoes of lives unchanged for so long, felt their steps reborn. They had seen what no one expected. God in a manger, majesty and fragility, eternity wrapped in cloth. And as they walked across me, I did not mind the pressure of their feet, for they pressed not burden, but purpose. They had become witnesses, and I just a field had become sanctuary. What more could the earth ask for? So I held them. Each step, each tear, each trembling laugh, I let their joy sink into my roots, their awe wash over my ridges. And when they were gone, when only starlight remained and the night slowly began to stretch toward dawn, I stayed. I remembered. I carried the memory in silence, waiting for the day someone would ask, "Where did it begin?" And I would answer, if I could, here, in the quiet, in the waiting, in a field that listened long enough to witness God step into time. They came without notice, like they always did. No horns, no announcements, just the dull sound of sandals pressing into soil, sheep grumbling quietly behind them, and the scent of ash from a fading fire clinging to their clothes. I knew them. I had known their kind since the first shepherd chose this place to rest his flock beneath the stretch of open sky. They were not kings, nor prophets, nor warriors. They were men with calloused hands and weary eyes, shoulders curved from years of watching, waiting, surviving. Their presence was quiet, but constant, like the rhythm of the earth. They walked as if they belonged to the night, not out of stealth, but out of understanding, men attuned to rhythms that others no longer heard. Their conversations were few, often whispered, often unfinished, like threads left loose in a well-worn cloak. They did not need many words. Their communion was in gesture, in silence, in the way one man would place a hand on another's shoulder as they looked upward, as if asking questions the stars could not answer. I saw them huddled by the embers of a dying flame, cloaks drawn tight against the cold, the wool of their garments holding on to yesterday's warmth like memories too fragile to let go. They told stories, not grand epics, but fragments the kind passed down in size. A brother lost to bandits, a dream of lions lying down with lambs, a mother's voice, long dead, humming lullabies of a kingdom where justice would flow like water. They didn't always believe these tales, but they told them anyway, as if the act of remembering kept some ancient promise barely alive. Their voice low, rough, trembled with the weight of things unfulfilled. Some of them had once studied scripture in youth before poverty turned pages into plows. They remembered phrases like shadow spartial, incomplete, but still potent. One would murmur, "Unto us a child is born," and another would nod, though neither knew what that truly meant. It wasn't knowledge they sought, but nearness. If the Messiah ever came, they hoped he would pass their way, not to raise them high, but to simply see them, to know they existed. I had watched one of them every season for nearly 3 decades. His beard had grayed, his sons had gone off to towns, yet he returned here with his flock, always looking toward the horizon with that same searching look. His name was never spoken by kings, his story never etched in scrolls. But I remembered him. The field never forgets the faithful, and the youngest among them, he barely spoke, just listened. Eyes too wide, too bright for one so poor. He would lie back in the grass and trace the stars with his finger, his lips moving in silent wonder. Sometimes I imagined he was praying, sometimes I hoped he was. That night, Before the sky opened, they were just as they had always been, men of dusk, not dawn. They were not prepared for angels, they were not dressed for glory, but something had prepared their hearts. I felt it in the way they stood, unknowing yet unafraid. The old man gripped his staff tighter, the young one leaned forward, and then, light, not sunlight, not firelight, but something that made the darkness shrink back in reverence. They did not run. Their eyes were wide, their mouths open, but they did not run. I felt their feet dig deeper into my soil, anchoring them. They were ready in the only way that mattered. They believed. Before the angel finished speaking, something within them had already said yes. The field held its breath again, not for fear, but for awe. And when the light faded, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They simply moved toward Bethlehem, toward the unknown, toward the child. Their steps pressed into me like seals into wax, marking a moment that would never be undone. I was no longer just a pasture. I was a beginning. The place where faith stopped being a whisper and became a march. And so they walked, not as shepherds, but as witnesses. No longer keepers of sheep, but keepers of revelation. The world did not hear them, but I did. The field remembers what history forgets. The stars watched them go. I watched them go. And beneath the surface, something ancient stirred within me. I had known countless nights, but never one that carved such deep lines into memory. I felt their faith leave an imprint deeper than hoof or heel. It was not loud, not spectacular, but it was real. The kind of real that roots itself in eternity. There was no ceremony, no parade, just a group of forgotten men moving through shadows, carrying a promise that had finally taken form. Later, when others asked how the Messiah had come, few would mention the shepherds. They would speak of kings and gifts, of genealogies and stars. But they would not speak of these men, these watchers of sheep who became watchers of glory. And yet, it was herein the hushed breath before wonder that heaven first touched earth. Not in the temple, not in a throne room, but here, where dew still clung to blades of grass and smoke from a shepherd's fire hung low in the night. I held it all, the light, the silence, the footsteps. I held it in the marrow of my earth, and I wished, though I had no lips, that I could cry out the truth, that those who wait in obscurity are the ones heaven often chooses first, that humility sees clearer in the dark, that sometimes glory walks not in gold, but in dust. If you had stood there beside me, you might not have seen anything extraordinary, just men moving across a field, just stars above them, just a breeze whispering through the olive groves. But I would have told you this was the night the world began to tilt toward redemption. And they, the nameless faithful, were the first to walk in its direction. They came as shepherds. They left as carriers of a mystery too vast for words. And I, the field, will tell their story as long as grass grows, as long as stars burn, as long as hope takes root in the hearts of those who dare to believe in a promise spoken softly and fulfilled in stillness. The wind returned slowly, not with force, but with gentleness, like a memory revisiting an old friend. It moved through me, brushing over the grass that still held the imprint of shepherd feet and angelic light. I had always known the wind. We shared centuries together, silent evenings, storms that bent my spine, breezes that carried laughter, cries, and sometimes prayers too soft for human ears. But tonight, it carried something different. It carried the echo of heaven's breath. It whispered not in words, but in presence. A stirring of something ancient and tender, like the hush before a promise is fulfilled. I leaned into it, the way only a field can be, opening every blade of grass, every inch of soil, to listen. The wind did not rush. It lingered, as though savoring the sacredness of what had just happened. It moved through olive trees and over stone walls, curling beneath shepherd cloaks and kissing the tears that had not yet fallen. I remembered how often it had passed me carrying more sorrow than joy, more longing than fulfillment. Many nights, it carried psalms sung by cracked voices, verses barely remembered by men who were too tired to hope. I knew those songs by heart. They had settled in my soil like seeds. And now, as the wind danced again, it brought those melodies back, not just as memory, but as truth. He will feed his flock like a shepherd, I had once heard a boy whisper. And tonight, I believed it. The wind carried the scent of smoke and sheep and night jasmine, but beneath it all, there was joy. Not loud joy, not the kind that sings and dances, but quiet joy, the kind that anchors, that holds. It wrapped around me like a shawl. For so long, I had held silence, not emptiness, but sacred stillness. Now the wind was filling that space with something alive. It carried the breath of God. Somewhere in the hills beyond me, shepherds were still walking. Their voice low, awestruck, fluttered like wings, and the wind carried their words back to me. We saw him, wrapped in cloth, lying in a manger. It was real. The angel, he said, glory. Their words landed softly on me like dew. I let them sink in. I would hold them, just as I had held the prayers, the songs, the doubts. It was my task, my joy. I thought then of how often the wind had watched disappointment. It had swirled around men who gave up, who forgot, who stopped looking for the promised one. But tonight, the wind was a witness to something different. It had seen belief rise. It had brushed against divine light. It had heard the heartbeat of heaven within human lungs, and so it moved restless and reverent. It did not roar. It did not tear branches or scatter flock. It simply passed, softly and purposefully, as if bowing before something greater than sky. And I, too, bowed. I bent beneath its touch, because the wind knew it had touched him, and everything it touched now shimmered with that knowing. I remembered one night, many seasons ago, when a child sat beneath the stars and whispered to the wind, "Will he ever come?" The wind had no answer then, only movement, only presence. But tonight, it had an answer, not in syllables, but in warmth, in peace, in the way it wrapped around each tree and stone and sheep and man like an embrace. The wind had become a song again. If you had stood beside me, you might have thought it was just a breeze, but you would have been wrong. The wind was the first to carry the news, the first to dance with the joy of heaven come to earth. Before preachers, before scrolls, before shouts, the wind had whispered, "He is here." It moved on, that wind not away, but forward, toward the stable, toward the sleeping town, toward others who had not yet heard. It would find cracked windows and open hearts. It would tug at cloaks, nudge open doors, rustle the edges of scrolls long forgotten. It would not shout, it would not explain, but it would stir, and stirring is sometimes all a soul needs to awaken. I remained still. That is my nature. I do not chase, I do not speak, but I feel. And that night, I felt the wind take with it the beginning of a new world. Not a world of power, but of presence. Not of conquest, but of incarnation. Not a world built by men, but a kingdom whispered by God through the breath of creation itself. The wind had been the first to know in Eden. It had heard the footsteps of God in the cool of the day, and now it had returned not to speak judgment, but to cradle joy. It circled the manger before anyone else, wrapping the straw, the cloth, the tiny sleeping form. It brought Mary's sigh to the stars. It carried Joseph's silent wonder to the fig trees. It was the lullaby no one wrote, the first hymn of the new covenant. I wonder if anyone else noticed, if anyone felt what I felt. Perhaps a bird tucked in a cypress tree, perhaps a lamb curled close to its mother. Or maybe no one did, maybe only I and the wind shared that knowing. That is enough. For long after the light had faded and the shepherds returned, after Bethlehem resumed its stillness, I could still feel the wind's touch. And every breeze since then has carried something of that night, a residue of revelation, a softness edged with glory. When the wind comes now, I lean in, I listen, I remember. And maybe, just maybe, you can too. The wind still whispers. Are you listening? The stars had always belonged to the night, and the night had always belonged to me. They rose faithfully, one by one, like ancient sentinels guarding the silence that blanketed the hills. I had watched them all my life, watched them shift and shimmer, watched them guide travelers and tease children's wishes. But that night, one of them was different. One did not belong. One burned not with cold fire, but with purpose. And even before the shepherds looked up, I felt it. That star did not rise. It arrived. It hovered not above palaces or cities, but over a stable low, humble, quiet. Yet its light was anything but. It pierced the darkness not with force, but with certainty, like a note perfectly struck, reverberating through centuries of waiting. I had seen comets before, meteors that streaked like arrows across the sky. But this was not like them. This was no accident of heaven. This light had intention. The shepherds saw it. Their faces, still etched with awe from the angel's song, tilted upward once more. Some pointed, others fell to their knees. The youngest simply wept, and I, the ground beneath their feet, the field that had held their questions and fears, felt that light settle upon me like oil poured out from heaven. It did not scorch, it consecrated. I watched it trace a line through the air, not fast, but steady-like. It knew exactly where to go. No falter, no deviation. It moved as if drawn by a voice only it could hear. And as it moved, I remembered. I remembered every time a child had looked at the stars and asked, when? I remembered the tired voices murmuring prophecy by firelight. I remembered the tears of those who had died without seeing this night. And I knew they were all present here, somehow, wrapped in that light. The animals stirred. Even the olive trees seemed to lean slightly, their branches reaching toward the glow like hands extended in prayer. Something deep beneath me shifted. I couldn't explain it. The stones within the soil hummed, like tuning forks struck by divinity. It was as if creation was adjusting itself to accommodate a miracle. I do not know what others saw. Maybe they dismissed it. Maybe some thought it was imagination, the mind playing tricks on tired eyes. But I know what I saw, what I felt. This was not just light, it was invitation. A divine beacon not demanding attention, but offering presence. It did not say, "Look at me," it whispered, "come and see." The old shepherd, the one who had waited longest, placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. He did not speak. Words were useless now. They simply walked toward the light, toward the town, toward the fulfillment of every aching night. And the star moved with them, not above like a general commanding troops, but beside them, like a companion on the journey. I had never seen such beauty, not because it dazzled, but because it aligned. Every thinksky, earth, breath, hope came into focus beneath its glow. The field was not just a place anymore. It was part of a map, part of the story. The night was not just darkness. It was the backdrop for the most tender kind of glory. Somewhere beyond the hills, another light flickered, torchlight, perhaps, or a candle in a window. Ordinary flames, unaware they shared the night with something extraordinary. The town of Bethlehem lay still, not yet stirred by wonder. But here, out in the field, in the place where people seldom looked for miracles, light had found its footing. I watched until the star settled. Not above a throne, not atop a tower, but above a place so common it was invisible to most. That is where it paused. That is where it stayed, as if saying, "Here, yes, here." It made no demands, it issued no commands, it simply shone. And in its light, I saw everything clearly: hope reborn, prophecy fulfilled, heaven's softness wrapped in humanity. Long after the shepherds disappeared into the distance, their shadows swallowed by the low walls of Bethlehem, the star remained. And I, who had seen 1,000 nights, could not stop watching. I did not blink. I did not sleep. I stayed awake with the sky, with the stone, with the silence. For how often does the earth get to witness the sky kneel? If you had come to me then, if you had stood on this very soil and asked, "Where is he?" I would not have pointed. I would have simply said, "Follow the light," because that is what I had learned. When all words fail, when all paths blur, the light does not. It waits, it guides, and it never forgets where it is needed. Even now, when clouds cover the stars, when night seems empty, I remember that one, the one that did not belong, the one that arrived with purpose, and I still believe it shines, maybe not in the sky, but in every soul who dares to walk toward wonder, even when they do not understand it. That night, I was just a field, just a patch of earth beneath men and sheep and sky. But because of that light, I became something more. I became a place where heaven touched earth, where faith found its way, where the ordinary became sacred. And I will never forget how it began with a light that did not rise, but arrived. I have no eyes, but I have seen. I have no ears, but I have heard. For I am the earth beneath it, all the soil that holds stories older than empires, the dust that remembers every footstep, every fall, every prayer pressed into its surface. I have known the weight of grief and the weight of glory, and that night, when the child was born, I felt both. I cradled the stable floor. I held the feet of shepherds and the edge of Mary's cloak. I tasted the salt of Joseph's sweat and the tears he would not let fall. I have always been present, beneath sandals and hooves, beneath plows and crosses, beneath laughter and lament. I held Cain's trembling knees. I drank Abel's innocent blood. I caught the tears of Abraham and the footprints of Moses. I split for prophets, groaned beneath kings, and swallowed the pride of men who thought themselves gods. Yet nothing had prepared me for this God, not in wrath, but in flesh. The weight of him was no heavier than a lamb. Yet everything shifted. The balance of all history, all pain, all longing settled into the straw, and the silence I held. I, who had cracked beneath the tread of empires, now held the souls of the Messiah's mother. I felt her toes curl against the cold. I felt her back press into the timber of the stable. I heard her breath quicken, then steady, then break into weeping, and I wept with her, though no one saw. The manger scraped gently against me, a feeding trough, wooden and splintered, resting on earth that had never known such purpose. I, who had cradled countless beasts and borne the waste of men, now bore a throne, his throne, not gold, not marble, just earth and wood and wonder. Around me, the world remained unaware. People slept. Soldiers grunted in boredom at the city gate. A merchant rolled over on his mat, dreaming of coins. But I knew. I felt eternity tremble in my dust, for in that infant's cry, something ancient woke. I felt the echo of Eden, the hush of the garden when God once walked in the cool of day. He had returned not with flaming sword or chariot, but with lungs learning to breathe, fingers that grasped straw, and a heart beating against my chest. The ox shifted, the donkey twitched. Mary lifted him, and for a moment he hovered just above me, suspended between heaven and earth, between promise and fulfillment. Then she placed him down, and I received him. Nothing I have ever held compares. His skin brushed against me, not in grandeur, but in grace. The soles of his tiny feet pressed into my dust, and in that contact, the curse began to unravel. The curse I had carried since Eden. Cursed is the ground because of you, they said. But that night, something reversed. The soil no longer only bore consequence, it bore a savior. I remembered the day Adam first stood upon me, his feet uncalloused, his breath borrowed from the breath of God. I remembered how I mourned when he fell, when the garden closed. I remembered how I swallowed graves and soaked up tears for generations. But now, I held the one who would open what had been shut. I felt it in my marrow. Redemption had entered my story. The child stirred. His hand curled around a piece of straw. I felt its tip press into my surface, like a signature, like a covenant signed not in ink, but in presence. I would hold that memory long after the stable fell to ruin, long after the manger rotted, long after cities crumbled and languages changed. For I had cradled the beginning of the end of sorrow. Joseph laid more straw, careful not to disturb the child. Mary sang. Her voice shook, thin from pain, but laced with awe. It filled the space between rafters and stars, and I held it too. Her lullaby sank into me like rain. Words of love, of relief, of reverence. I absorbed them all. I always do. That is my task, to remember what others forget. They will build over me. They will walk on me. They will pave me, plow me, bury in me. But I will not let this night be lost. When blood is spilled again, his blood I will recall this night. When a tomb is carved, I will remember the manger. When nails pierce wood, I will remember the straw. When darkness falls at midday, I will remember the light in Mary's eyes. I am the earth. I do not move, but I witness, I endure. And that night, in a corner of Bethlehem, I held more than a child. I held the turning of all things, and I will tell the roots, the rivers, the stones, until even the mountains remember that once God lay upon the earth, and the earth rejoiced. Years will pass, centuries. Stones will be stacked into sanctuaries. altars will rise and fall, but still, I will remember this night. For though I cannot speak, every spring that pushes green through my skin, every harvest that answers hunger, will carry a trace of that child. The one who turned my curse into calling, the one whose weight was gentle, but whose presence split history in two. I do not envy the sky with its stars. I do not crave the sea's vastness. I am content to lie low, to be walked on, to be unnoticed, because I know who I have held, and that is enough. So come, if you ever doubt, press your hand to the soil. Listen not with ears, but with longing. You may not hear words, but if you're still enough, if you're listening like I did, you just might remember. You might feel the warmth where straw once lay. You might sense the heartbeat of a God who chose not to stand above, but to lie among. And you might believe again, for I am the earth. I remember, she sang, though her body ached. She sang, though her voice trembled with exhaustion. It was not a lullaby learned from her mother, not one repeated from generations past. It rose from somewhere deeper, from the silence between pain and promise, from the mystery that now lay wrapped in cloth upon her chest. Mary sang, and I listened. Her song had no rhyme, no meter. It did not rise with melody nor fall in chorus. Yet it carried weight. It carried wonder. Each note broken, breathless, was laced with the awe of one who had just held God and lived. She did not understand it all. How could she? The angel's words still echoed in her mind. You will bear a son. But it was no longer prophecy. It was heartbeat, warmth, a tiny breath against her collarbone. Joseph sat close, silent, his hand resting near hers. He did not join the song. He simply listened. That was enough. His stillness was its own kind of harmony. His presence, a quiet anchor in the sea of her disbelief. The child stirred, and she looked down. Her song softened. It became a whisper. It became a prayer. She sang to calm him, but I think she also sang to calm herself. The weight of what had happened pressed against her as much as the straw pressed into her skin. She had said yes with courage, but now that the promise had become flesh, she had only questions. What would he grow to be? What danger would he face? Would she be enough? But for now, she sang, because singing was all she could offer. The stable held its breath. The animals shifted in quiet rhythms. The wind, once restless, now curled around the beams and stones like a guardian. I absorbed every note into my walls, into my soil. For a lullaby like this was not meant to vanish. It would linger, like incense. It would cling to the night long after Mary fell asleep. She did not sing of greatness, not of thrones or crowns. She sang of smallness, of hunger and hope, of a world turned tender. She sang as a mother who had nothing but herself and who gave it wholly. I remember one line, though it was barely a breath. You came low, so I would not be afraid. And then she kissed his forehead, and the song faded. The night did not respond with applause. There were no choirs to echo her melody. But something deeper moved. The rafters creaked softly, as if bowing. The shadows, once heavy, grew gentle. Even the moon, peeking through a crack in the wall, seemed to hush its glow. The song had changed the room not with noise, but with nearness. I have heard many songs in my time. Songs of celebration, songs of mourning, songs of war and of weddings. But none like this. This one was sung not from strength, but from surrender. Not from knowledge, but from trust. It was the sound of humanity reaching up to divinity, unsure if it would be held and finding, to its wonder, that it already was. Later, much later, I would hear stories of choirs, of angels, of travelers bearing gifts, of kings threatened by the birth of a carpenter's son. But in this moment, there was only her voice, her breath, her son, and a lullaby that dared to believe this world, bruised and broken, could still be beautiful if held rightly. She wrapped him tighter and leaned back, her eyes closed. The lullaby had ended, but its echo remained. In the timbers, in the soil, in the stars outside, and perhaps even in him. If ever you find yourself in darkness, afraid or alone, listen, not with your ears, but with your longing. The lullaby still hums through the night. It waits in the silence between worry and wonder. It lives in the heartbeat of every soul that chooses to believe even when they do not understand. It was not written, it was not recorded, but I remember, I always will. For I was the stable, and I listened while she sang. Years from now, no one will remember the notes. They will write of miracles and teachings, of crosses and resurrections, but not of the lullaby, not of the fragile song that welcomed the word into the world. That is why I hold it, because someone must. I think she knew it would be forgotten. I think that's why she gave it so fully. Gave it to the straw and the shadows and the breath between her ribs. Maybe lullabies are not meant to be preserved, only past carried in the rhythm of a rocking motion, in the hush of a waiting heart. And still, I remember the way her voice cracked when she sang the word peace, the way she pressed her cheek against his, the way she dared to sing in the dark, before any light had come. This is what I offer you, not a performance, not a doctrine, but a sound. A mother holding her child, singing over salvation. If you listen closely, you'll hear it too. It's never left. Because even now, long after the straw has turned to dust, long after the child has grown and the mother has wept, the lullaby remains. It floats through time, not as music, but as memory. A reminder that love once entered the world softly, in a song, in the dark, in the arms of a girl who believed. And that is enough. I am not graceful like the horses. I do not run fast or carry soldiers into glory. I am small, with shaggy hair and tired knees. I walk where I'm told and stop when I'm not, but I see things. I always have. That night, I saw something no creature should ever forget. I saw him. They brought me to the stable earlier that day. My legs were sore from the journey. Dust clung to my coat. I had carried the woman, heavy with child, across stone and wind and uneven ground. She never complained. She sang sometimes, spoke softly to the man walking beside me. When the pains came, her voice caught in the air like broken glass. He helped her down, and she leaned on him, trembling. I stood nearby, unsure of what I was witnessing, but feeling the air shift. The stable was dark. I knew its scenthe, sweat, old wood, nothing new, yet something in it felt new, as if the world had bent slightly, like a branch under fresh snow. They found a corner. The man laid down the blanket. She lay upon it. I stood still, hooves sunk into straw, ears twitching to the rhythm of her breathing. Time passed slowly, then all at once. Her cry pierced the stillness. The man whispered something I couldn't understand. Then silence. Then a sound I'd never heard, a cry, small and sharp. New, alive. I turned, and I saw him. He was so small, smaller than I imagined the Son of Heaven would be. His hands curled into fists, his skin flushed, his eyes closed tight. He didn't glow, he didn't hover. He just was. A child, a boy, a god. I stepped closer, careful not to frighten them. She looked up at me. Her eyes were tired but kind. She smiled. The man gestured toward the manger. I watched as she wrapped him, kissed his forehead, and placed him in the wooden trough I had once eaten from. I sniffed. It still smelled like barley, but now it held something more nourishing than any food I'd known. The others slept. The ox let out a slow breath. A mouse skittered along a beam. But I could not sleep. I kept watch, not because I was told to, but because I could not look away. I had carried many burdens, but none like this. He opened his eyes once, just briefly. They were dark, like a deep well. But there was no fear, no confusion, just awareness, as if he already knew the world and still chose to come. His gaze met mine. For a breath, we were the only two awake, the donkey and the divine. No one will write that moment down, but I carry it still. He blinked slowly, then closed his eyes again, drifting into sleep. But I remained. I stood guard, not because I was noble, but because I was near. Sometimes that is all God asks. Not brilliance, not beauty, just nearness. They will talk of kings and gifts and stars. They will sing of angels and shepherds. But I was there before them. I carried the mother. I watched the birth. I stood in silence as the eternal became flesh. And I will never forget. In years to come, I may carry burdens again. I may walk dusty roads, unseen and unremarked, but I will always remember the night I carried hope. The night I looked into the eyes of the one who made me and saw no judgment, only love. So if you see me one day, ears drooped, back bent, know that I once stood in a stable and saw the world begin again. Others might mock my kind. We are slow, we are plain. But that night, I learned slowness has its place. It means we linger, we notice. I noticed the way she held him, not with power but with tenderness. I noticed how Joseph stayed awake longer than he should, his eyes scanning the night as if protecting more than just a child protecting a promise. I noticed how the straw glowed slightly where he lay, not from light, but from warmth, the warmth of presence. It was not heat that changed the stable, it was him. And though I had no words, I prayed. A donkey's prayer is simple. It says, I am here, use me. That night, I believe God heard it. I believe he accepted it. For what else could explain the peace that settled over me, the kind I'd never known? Not from rest, but from reverence. When the shepherds arrived, I did not bray or move. I stood back. They knelt. They wept. They laughed. I watched, and I knew what they saw. For I had seen it first, and now you know. You, who may feel ordinary. You, who may feel forgotten. Remember this. God let a donkey see him first, not because I was wise or strong or holy, but because I was there. I showed up. I stayed. So stay, show up. Carry what needs to be carried. Watch what others miss. Believe in what you see, even when no one else understands it. Because one day, a quiet moment in a shadowed place might become the moment everything changes, and I will carry that night with me always. In the rhythm of my steps, in the strength of my back, in the silence of my waiting. For once, I was chosen, I was needed, I was near, and that will always be enough. You may forget my face, you may forget my name, but remember the story. A donkey once carried the Mother of God. A donkey once watched the Savior sleep, and perhaps, in your own way, you will carry him too. Not on your back, but in your life, in your waiting, in your wondering, and that too will be holy. I have no hands, no voice, no memory of light. I am what remains when everything else rests, when the fire dims, when laughter fades, when feet stop moving. I am the threshold where fear often waits. I am the shadow stretching just beyond the door. That night, I stretched longer than usual, for something holy had arrived, and even I, the dark, felt it. I do not resent the light. I exist because it retreats. But I've seen how people treat me. They close doors against me, whisper in fear, huddle in corners with flame and prayers. They name me with trembling, yet I am not the enemy. I am the place where longing lives. I am the space before the dawn. That night, I was deeper than usual, heavier, not menacing, expectant. The couple came late. I saw them hesitate. The man looked over his shoulder more than once. The woman walked slower than her pain. I gave them what I could: privacy, a moment untouched by watching eyes. There were no rooms left in the inn, but there was always room in me. I do not need walls. I welcome what the world casts aside. They stepped into the stable, and I curled around them. I did not threaten. I listened. When she cried out, I softened. When he whispered comfort, I carried the sound like a lullaby. And when the baby came, I held the silence that followed the stunned silence of something eternal taking its first breath. I did not flee when he opened his eyes. I thought I would. I thought the one who created the stars might banish me forever. But he didn't. He looked into the dark and did not turn away. His gaze, tiny and tender, met me with recognition, as if he remembered I was there at the beginning, hovering over the deep, waiting for the voice to say, "Let there be." The shepherds came, their footsteps loud in the hush. They brought their awe and their questions. I made space for them. I lengthened to hold their wondering. I gave them room to kneel. Light spilled from their eyes. But I remained not as a threat, but as witness. What a strange night. Glory did not banish me. It invited me. Light did not erase me. It grew inside me. I am often the place where things end, but that night, I was where everything began. And though no one thanked me, I did not mind. That is the way with shadows. We are not made to be seen, only to hold what cannot yet be understood. Later, the child slept. The mother dozed in exhaustion, one hand resting on the edge of the manger. The father sat close by, still awake, still watching, and I stood with them. No one saw me. That was my offering. I do not speak, but I remember. I remember the way his breath steadied the air. I remember how his weight reshaped silence. I remember how even the smallest flicker of warmth could stretch across the deepest dark and not be swallowed. It was as if light, true light, had been born not to replace me, but to reveal me. I had never known dignity before that night, but I felt it then. I have been blamed for muchmen's fear, children's cries, secrets, and violence. But that night, I was holy. That night, I became a chapel, a hushed space where God slipped into skin, a quiet so profound that even time dared not disturb it. Not every place has light, but any place can hold presence. So I ask you this, when darkness finds you, as it always will you curse it, or will you wait in it? Will you see it as exiliar, as sanctuary? Will you let the shadow terrify you, or will you wonder what sacred thing it might be hiding? Because I was there, and I am still here. And I tell you, the light does not always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it comes in a whisper, through pain, through blood, through straw, and it asks for shelter, not from the strong, but from the open. That night, I was the doorway. I did not shut, I did not shudder. I opened wide, and I will never forget what passed through me. They will tell the story with lights, with candles, with stars and songs and halos. But I hope someone remembers me. I hope someone recalls that the first throne was not gilded, but wrapped in dark. That the first audience was not kings, but silence. That God did not wait for the morning. He came in the night. I have heard the cries of exile. I have witnessed secrets never confessed. I have held the cold breath of the dying. But never have I held anything so gentle as that child's sigh. Never have I seen eyes so new look back at me with knowing. And now I linger in every unlit room, every sleepless night, every moment before belief. I do not preach, I do not shine, I simply stay, waiting, as I did then, for I know what you do not. I know what is possible in the dark. So if you wake at midnight, heart pounding, unsure, remember me. Remember that I once welcomed glory, that I once made room, and so can you. Darkness is not absence. Sometimes it is preparation, and if ever you wonder where he is, when all is quiet and hope feels thin, do not fear the night. He has been here before. He is never far. Just open the door. I am not a miracle. I am not prophecy or fire from heaven. I do not part seas or raise the dead. I am a simple thing, quiet and unseen. I am the first taste of life. I am nourishment wrapped in tenderness. I am the milk that flowed the moment she held him close. And on that night, I became something more than sustenance. I became a covenant. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from awe. She had carried the weight of heaven for months, and now heaven nestled at her chest. His cry was not loud. It was small, urgent, filled with need. And in answer, she drew him near, letting his tiny mouth find what it had never tasted yet somehow already known. I flowed, not by command, not by force. I came because that is what love does, it gives. I had waited in silence, hidden in her, forming slowly as her body changed. I did not question the waiting. I was part of the preparation, and now, with the world hushed and her arms trembling, I became the bridge between eternity and survival. The first swallow was almost imperceptible. His lips barely moved, but I felt it, that gentle pull, that sacred hunger. I entered him, and he received me. The one who had formed galaxies now fed like every other infant mouth to breast, moment by moment. She looked down at him, eyes wide with both instinct and surprise. Her hand cupped his head. She whispered words no one would ever record, soft syllables soaked in mother love. She did not know theology, but in that moment she knew what no scholar could explain, that divinity does not despise dependence. I sustained him, quietly, faithfully, not in glory, but in goodness. My task was not to be noticed, but to nourish. And in that, I found purpose. The stable was still. The animals quieted. Even the wind held its breath. I had no voice, but if I could speak, I would have told them, "This is holy." This act, so ordinary, is where heaven bends low enough to be held. This is where the Creator chooses to receive, not command. This is where salvation takes its first taste of the world it came to redeem. She would feed him many times after this night, through storms, through flights to Egypt, through quiet mornings in Nazareth. But this first time was different. It was not routine, it was revelation. Each drop I gave held more than nutrients. It held memory, it held promise. It carried whispers of manna in the wilderness, of honey from the rock. It tasted like covenant and smelled like hope. As he drank, I felt something unexpected. He received me, yes, but somehow he also gave, not in milk, but in meaning. In the way he rested, utterly unafraid. In the way his fingers curled and uncurled against her skin. In the way his breathing slowed, trusting she would not pull away. I have nourished many, but none like him. And she, Mary, though worn and wounded from birth, did not hesitate. She offered herself without thought, without fear. In this simple act, she became priest and altar. She gave of herself, and in doing so, welcomed the world's healing. They will speak of miracles of water into wine, of blind eyes opened. But they may forget this, that the first miracle was a mother's milk, that God, in choosing to be fed, blessed every feeding thereafter. When the shepherds came, they found her holding him close. They knelt not just before a baby, but before the sacred bond of body and need, of gift and receiving. They did not interrupt. They knew this moment was not theirs to enter. They watched and they wept. And I remained, flowing gently, silently, faithfully. You do not see me in paintings. You do not hear my name in hymns. But I was there. I was first, before the teachings, before the miracles, before the cross. There was hunger, and there was me. Sometimes I wonder if people forget how fragile it all began, how salvation did not arrive in thunder, but in thirst, and how that thirst was met not by angels, but by a woman's body, given freely. In me lived the ache of every mother who ever wondered if she had enough. In me lived the assurance that even the smallest gift, given in love, could sustain the divine. And so I remain, hidden in the story, but never absent. For every act of care, every meal given in love, every weary parent who wakes in the night to nourish what cannot yet speak, that is where I dwell. I was the first to feed him, but not the last. And if you ever wonder how close God comes, look not to the sky, but to the cradle, to the chest, to the quiet flow that says, I am here, I am enough, I am yours. And if the world forgets me, I will not mind, for he remembers. He remembers how I tasted, how I comforted, how I remained, and that is enough. So the next time you witness love given quietly in kitchens, in hospital rooms, in long nights beside cradles, know that I am there too. The first gift, the quiet miracle, the milk of mercy, and in that small, sacred act, heaven still draws near. For love always begins with giving, and in that giving, something eternal takes root quietly, completely, forever. My hands are not soft. They carry the memory of splinters, of rough beams, of tools shaped for weight more than elegance. I am no stranger to knots or calluses. I am not a hand for writing scrolls or raising swords. I build, I fix, I bear. But on that night, I did something I had never done. I held salvation, and I did not tremble. The moment he was born, she turned to Minot with panic, not with fear, but with quiet trust. Joseph, she whispered, and in that word, she gave him to me. I had built many cradles. I had shaped cedar into doors, olive wood into beams. But never had I carried anything so light, so unbearably light, that it nearly broke me. I reached out. My fingers shook. Not because I doubted the child, but because I doubted myself. What right did these worn hands have to hold the one who had formed the trees I once cut? What steadiness could I offer the one who held the world in his breath? But he did not flinch. His tiny body pressed into my palms, warm and real. His head nestled into the crook of my thumb. I thought I would cry. I did not. I simply breathed, deeply, as if for the first time. His weight was not much, but it was enough to shift everything inside me. All the years of uncertainty, of questions, of wondering if I was only the shadow beside her light suddenly, they faded. Because in that moment, he was mine too. Not by blood, but by choice. Not because I had to, but because I said yes. I had said yes when the angel came. Yes when the rumors began. Yes when the doors closed in our faces. Yes when we found only a stable. And now, as his fingers curled around one of mine, I said yes again. He did not speak. He did not need to. Everything in his nearness spoke purpose. He trusted me, completely, and that trust changed the way I would touch the world from that night forward. Later, I laid him in the manger carefully, slowly, as if placing the world back into balance. The wood creaked beneath him, familiar under my fingers. I had worked with wood all my life. But this trough, this moment, was unlike any other. She leaned beside me, brushing straw from his cheek. We said nothing. Silence was our prayer. In the days ahead, I would use these hands to protect him, to build shelter, to chop wood for warmth, to lift him when he cried. I would teach him how to hold a chisel, how to sand smooth a rough edge, how to steady a nail, not knowing he would one day face nails of another kind. These hands, weathered and worn, would never write books or carry scrolls, but they would carry him, through dust and danger, through exile, through homecoming. They would lift him onto my shoulders, catch him when he stumbled, hold his face when he slept. I was not chosen for eloquence, I was chosen for steadiness, and in that I found my place. Years from now, they may forget me. My name may be a footnote, but these hands, they remember. They remember the weight of that first night, the warmth, the wonder, the holy fragility of flesh that trusted me to hold it. And now, whenever I work, whenever I build or mend, I do so as one who once held God. Not in metaphor, not in dream, but in splinters and straw and skin. And now, I speak to you not with voice, but with work-worn hands. If you ever wonder whether your ordinary life can hold the sacred, I tell you, it can. If you ever doubt whether your labor, your silence, your steadfastness matter, I tell you, they do. For God did not seek out kings for his cradle. He did not ask for warriors to guard his first breath. He asked for me, a man with rough palms, a man who listens more than speaks, a man who said yes, again and again, when no one else understood. I have built many things, tables for meals, roofs for shelter, cradles for children, but the greatest thing I ever helped build was not made of wood. It was made of trust, of presence, of holding what others feared to touch. If ever you find your hands empty, your name forgotten, your work unseen, remember mine. Remember that the Savior was first held by hands that knew how to carry weight and not complain. Not every calling shouts. Some simply hold. Some build quietly in the background. Some, like mine, say yes without applause. And in that yes, eternity is cradled. And though I may never fully understand why I was chosen, I know this much. I was there. I held him, and he let me. And that is enough. So I keep building. I keep steady. For these hands, once ordinary, were once full of God. And now, whenever I press wood into place, whenever I mend a chair or shape a beam, I remember. I remember the night the world changed in my arms. I remember the weight that felt like peace. I remember the warmth that taught me God is not far, not distant, but close enough to be held. If ever you wonder where to find him, look for the ones who build, the ones who hold, the ones who say yes in silence. He is there. And so I build still, not just with wood, but with wonder. And in every yes, he is near.